All right. Hello and welcome. We see people pouring into the webinar. Thanks for joining us today. Give it another quick minute here for people to show up. While we're getting ready, I know people are pouring in here. Today is National Make Your Bed Day here in the US. Shocking. Make your bed. Hopefully everybody makes their bed. So my question for you in the icebreaker here are two things. If you could tell us, where are you calling in from and what time do you typically go to bed? This is one of my favorite parts of the show, panelists. I always love learning about people. So yeah, where are you dialing in from and what time do you typically go to bed? I'll go ahead and answer for myself. I'd say about 9 o'clock. I get up super early. I get up 4:30 every day. So I go to bed about 9 o'clock, which is an early bird for me. 11:30. I saw 11:30. I didn't know there was an 11:30. Holy cow. I see 11. Nice. 10:30. Look at this.
Oh, wow.
Scottsdale.
Alaska.
Midnight. I saw
Oh,
it
wow.
midnight.
Yeah.
Georgetown, Ohio. Pam's going to bed at midnight. I love it. 10 p.m. Not early enough. I like that
30.
one, Jillian. I'm with
Yeah.
you on that. So true. Cape Coral. These are great locations too. I love seeing where everybody's coming from.
I know. Baton Rouge.
Yep. 10:30. We are a science company. I could probably run some statistics. I'm not going to, but it'd be interesting to see like the median. Do you do the mode? Like what are we gonna which descriptive statistics are we gonna go on here? All right, we're going to give just one more minute. If you're listening in, you're wondering why we're talking about people's bedtimes. Just we're waiting for people to come from their last meeting and just join us. We still have people coming into the webinar. We're going to get started soon with our Perspectives webinar series for this month, which is called Recess is Over, Why Learning at Every Level is Good for Business. So if you want to let us know where you're dialing in from and what time you typically go to bed, that'd be great. Another midnight. Man, it almost hurts my feelings, midnight. But hey, that's what you're into. Night owls. I like it. Wonder where the term night owl came from. Promise I'm not going to do this the whole webinar.
I know for me, Matt, I always wish I had gone to bed earlier. I am
Yeah,
a
right.
night owl too, but I always wish, why didn't I go to bed earlier?
So true. All right. Well, hey, everybody, thanks. You can keep those coming in if you'd like, but I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Thanks again for joining our webinar. We've got a great panel for you today. I'm going to do a quick round of introductions. My name is Matt. I'm the host of the show, Godfather of Talent Optimization. Love hosting the show every month. So thanks so much for being here. And I'll get us started with Dr. Deborah Watts. Deborah has spent more than 20 years helping people and organizations grow. Her passion is developing professionals into tomorrow's leaders and coaching leaders on how to optimize their performance as well as the performance of their team. Deborah, thanks so much for being here.
You're welcome.
Next up, we have Jared Andres. Jared is an L&D professional with 15 years of experience building and leading high-impact leadership development, workforce development, and corporate training programs. He currently leads learning experience design at Critical Mass, an award-winning full-service digital experience design agency. Jared, thanks for sharing your insights with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And last but certainly not least, we have Akshata Manyan. Akshata leveraging 2 decades of experience in coaching, talent development, and people operations. Akshata leads learning and organizational development for Innova Solutions, a global digital transformation solutions provider. She's worked with renowned global firms, including IBM, Global Foundries, Amazon, and Deloitte, driving talent programs for over 50,000 employees. Akshata, thanks so much for being with us today.
Excited to be here.
It's going to be a fabulous panel. I have such respect for learning, and to have educators like yourselves with us talking all about learning at every level, it's going to be fabulous. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and move on to the housekeeping items. Always popular, crowd pleaser. The webinar is being recorded and will be emailed to you if you're listening in on the call. If you're going to use and have questions for the panel, you're going to want to use the Q&A during the session. You're welcome to use the chat as well. But if you put a question in the Q&A using the Zoom function, you can see in your Zoom toolbar there, then we'll be sure to be able to pose it to our panelists at the end of the show when we have our audience Q&A segment. And you're going to want to stick around to the end because our panelists have bonus resources for you, their contact information, and we'll even give you a preview of next month's webinar. So that's a little bit of housekeeping for you. We'll go on to the next slide. I pulled a couple of headlines just within the last 30 days talking about and underscoring why it's so important that we embrace learning. And so here's the first example. Some hiring managers seeing Gen Z as unemployable. Oh my gosh. And a lot of it came down to skills and a lack of certain skills. You can see in the middle, we're talking about a lack of a very specialized skill set like AI, creating a talent shortage for a wide swath of businesses. And finally, in more specialized areas, something like skill shortages talking about innovation within health. That sounds like something that's pretty important. Like we really need to talk about how we help our workforce learn. So that's kind of the backdrop that we want to talk about today. We're playing off of the back to school theme, but we're going to talk all about learning today. So we'll go on to our next part of the show where we always like to hear from you. So this is our audience poll. You're going to see a link go into the chat that's going to get you a direct link to our Menti poll. If you got a magic phone, you can also click that QR code on the screen and be taken to our 2-question poll today. The first question, there's a couple of different types of learning that you might offer workers. Check all that apply. We have onboarding. That's a very important type of learning. What about technical skills development, or I don't like the term, but soft skills development? And I even wrote that item, soft skills development. What about team and group training, leadership development, or mentorship? So check all that apply. And as these these results are coming in, panelists, I'll ask any surprises that you see in terms of the overall percentages or numbers as they continue to show up for us here. See a lot of leadership development. That's probably a little surprising to me. It's good to see them.
Mm-hmm.
Mentorship a little less. Akshata, I know your groups have a lot of experience with mentorship for sure. 21 for onboarding. That's number 1 so far. Yeah.
Mm.
Makes good sense. Yeah. Okay. Just a little bit more. It's almost like a race. You can see them all clicking through, coming in. I like it.
You know, with all the focus on AI, I'm surprised that technical skills are not,
Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point. Great point. Yeah,
And Matt,
onboarding.
I call soft skills critical skills because we really need.
Yeah, they're sorely lacking, right?
Yeah.
In pockets. All right, very nice. Okay, well, let's go on to our next question, which is a little bit of a different twist on this one. I find that executive attitudes, because obviously a lot of times they control investment. How would you describe, this is open text, how would you describe your executive's attitude toward training investments? I'm not even going to put my thumb on the scale at all. I'm just going to let that stand and see what kind of people, see what kind of phrases and words, however, they might tap in there. And I'll ask our panelists also to help me respond to this. A little bit of a difference of opinion between overlooked versus crucial, necessary. Yeah. Awesome. That's a good one. They don't see training as an investment. Oh no.
Yeah, that's not good.
Understandable. Mixed is fair.
Crucial. I like that one.
Supportive, open, far removed. Boy, this is really like indifferent. I don't think indifferent's super great. Beneficial, interested but confused. That's me on most days. No. Have to prove the ROI first. I think that's reasonable, right?
Critical.
Low priority. Don't want to spend time on it. Time in all caps. Everybody's so busy. Who's got time to train? Who's got time to learn how to do things faster? Oh no. Yeah, understood. All right. Let's keep these coming in. We'll include these in the result set that we share back out as well. I just love learning from the audience. Thank you so much for sharing some of your insights with us. It's really valuable for us to have that understanding of your point of view as we go into the panel discussion. So every time we get together, we always like to talk about the talent optimization framework. What does it take to pass from business strategy to business results? We got to go through the people part. How do we design winning teams, et cetera? So without further ado, I'll go ahead and ask for one more click. I tried to highlight some of the different areas that learning really shows up in a talent optimization framework. One example around design, which is all about how teams do team-based work. I'm seeing a really strong interest these days in team-based training and coaching. So rather than learning being an isolated experience, it's a group experience, which is pretty cool. On the bottom, when we think about employees, that's the domain of Inspire. Skills development, hugely important. Technical skills, soft skills, all of it. At the top, employer brand. I see a lot of times when we're trying to win top talent, talking about the investment we're going to make, the education, what you'll come and learn here. That could be as valuable as salary if you look over the lifetime of your career, these types of things. And then diagnose is the domain of the employee experience and driving up high levels of employee commitment through learning, making sure that we recognize that we're investing in you, training you, mentoring, helping you, realize your own personal goals within the context of organizational goals. So lots of ways that learning shows up in the talent optimization framework that hopefully that little mapping kind of helps us connect the dots and put those things together. Cool. So with that, we're going to turn over to our panel discussion. And I'll get us started with this one. I want to talk a little bit more in depth about some of the current forces that are making learning important. Like, why should we care so much about learning? And in this case, I think I might ask you, can you get us started with this one, Jared?
Sure, thanks. Yeah. Some of the forces, I guess the first thing that comes to mind are two of the headlines that you shared right at the outset of this call. The first being AI. We're a creative digital experience agency. So AI is very, very top of mind for us. And the other is that headline that I hate to see things like this with Gen Z is unemployable. I'm a millennial. I'm old enough to remember when everyone said the millennials were effectively unemployable. And now that millennials are beginning to take on leadership roles in organizations, it's really disheartening for me to see that sort of attitude still so prevalent. So we do have a few ways that we're responding to that internally as an agency. For AI, we're sort of looking at two primary channels for delivering AI training. The first is more for the general audience, where we're talking about things like basic AI literacy, ethics, safety. What are some basics around prompting? How can you apply these tools to your work streams? The other is, of course, more targeted. So these are for the groups of staff that are actively using some of the tools. And those are more of your hard skills. Like, this is how you use Firefly. This is how you get the most out of ChatGPT-4, different things like that. With the Gen Z is unemployable headline, one of the things that we've recently rolled out is actually an intergenerational mentorship program. And our hope there, we've paired somebody from a younger generation with somebody from an older generation from different disciplines within the business. And our hope is to build some understanding between the generations. So it's a monthly meeting where they discuss a different topic. We have guides to help them do that, everything from communication to work-life balance to different approaches to technology. And so far, the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, and I do think that we are helping to bridge some of those gaps. So those are sort of my initial thoughts there.
That's great to hear. I love that. And I love the fact that, for the beginning of human history, we've always had this evolution of technology, of multi-generation, but it always shows up and presents itself uniquely every time. So now here comes AI, here comes Gen Z. So really great. But Deborah, I'll ask you the same question. So give me some example of other forces you're seeing out there that are really putting a premium on learning.
Yeah, I think actually what we've even started with today, Matt, Jared, what you just said, I think it can be summed up in a quote that you probably have all heard, and that is the number one skill in the 21st century is the ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. It's an Alvin Toffler quote, and I think it really is key with the speed of change that we're seeing. Technology, Jared, you just mentioned. But there's also this thing called turnover that is very costly to a company. And I know some of the latest statistics show that turnover can be up to 2 times that person's annual salary when they get let go. So if you from a financial perspective and an employee making 50,000 and they don't make it, that overall hit to the company is a lot more than just that 50,000. And so when you think about 2 times that annual salary and reposting that job, I know my HR folks on this call, you get in that cycle, I call it the swirl, and you can't get out of it. That is costly to a company. And by the time you get that next person back on and up to speed and they're productive, huge hit to the company. So I just think that turnover piece needs to be more directly correlated with the importance of having a strong L&D program within your organization.
Love that. Love that. And Akshat, I'll give you the last word on that one. So other forces you're seeing or things that you think about when you think about why learning's so doggone important.
Yeah, I think it's a little of what Deborah and Jared just mentioned here. And it's also, if you have to look at it, more from a macro perspective, it's really looking at the workforce of the future. If you are going to be really preparing to grow an organization, and especially in our climate today where, there are more startups and even established companies are constantly reinventing themselves and their operating model and their strategy, the whole idea is you're going to have more women than men. You're going to have a lot more Gen Zs in the workforce. You are going to have a disappearing generation, and you're going to have a lot more new generations. It's not just Gen Zs. And more than that, it's also the diversity. The world is shrinking. We've been saying this for 20 years, but definitely now the evidence of it is in the in the workplace now. The kind of diversity you're going to have in language, origin, and whatnot. This is a different world that we're talking about. And everybody has to learn these new skills. It's no longer that, oh, we're going to hire somebody in tech, we're going to hire someone in HR. It's all we all need to coexist. Like, you cannot hire an HR professional today who's not well versed in tech. AI has really brought up a new world for us, where all of us have to kind of up our game a little, which is why, irrespective of generations, irrespective of any diversity factors here, we have to relook at how learning needs to happen now.
I like that a lot. And what you're sparking for me, all three of your responses, is that there are certain things that we need to learn that are fairly straightforward, like when it comes to learning AI skills, for example. There's lots of places we can go to learn, prompts and all these kinds of things, which is great. But to your earlier point, Jared, when you said like millennials are now stepping into these leadership positions, there isn't training out there that teaches you, how do I manage this type of multi-generational workforce when some are in the office and some are remote and some are sandwiched between trying to care for kids and aging parents all at the same time. And I'm not in that situation, but I have to help them. Holy cow, that you don't just Google that and figure that stuff out, right? So it's like this constant learning, relearning, and understanding that there's differences in the things that we need to learn. But we know, for example, from those Menti poll that we saw a little bit earlier, sometimes learning is not happening. So my question I want to turn to is, what are some of the things that get in the way of learning? What prevents us from making learning possible? What are some of those barriers? And Deborah, I wonder if you might get us started this time when you think about what are some of the things. We heard a couple, but just what comes to mind for you?
Cost always comes to mind, especially with small businesses. How do they find the money to cover training? I think that, the lack of, I hate to say this, but based on what we saw in just the Menti poll, and a lot of it was about management and leaders and the executive folks, sometimes they don't feel like they need it. So there's that lack of just self-awareness. Oh, I don't need training. I've got this. And then I think a big piece of it too, Matt, is really understanding the L&D model. I think some of us end up in a position of training and we don't fully understand this model of 70, 20, 10. I'm sure many people on the call are familiar with it, but 70% is that on the job, the challenging experience. That's how adults learn. You've got the 20% that is, hey, how are you developing and building relationships? And then you have the 10% that is really that formal learning, when you go sit in a workshop and you're officially, learning, so to speak. But even then, adults learn through insight. We have to change how we teach individuals because it's different than K through 12. We can't, as adults, look at a PowerPoint, memorize some information, and then go apply it tomorrow. Behavioral change takes time, and we have to understand that for adults, we've got to hear the concept, we've got to think through it, we have to apply it to ourselves or our team, and then that sparks that insight, or what Oprah calls that aha moment, which I love, because then it really sticks with you. So for me, I think if we can improve in that area, I think folks will get more out of the training that they do go to.
Gotcha. Akshata, same question for you. When you think about barriers, what kind of barriers do you see when it comes to learning?
I think one is people wanting the training. Yes, self-awareness, exactly as Deborah says, it might block them. The other part is, let's say, even if they do recognize it, even if they see the need for it, for example, who does not want training in AI now? So yes. And I hear a lot of interest for leadership development. Everybody raises their hand. Everybody wants it. But, the final action when it comes to execution, I think there's always a little bit of hesitation, some excuses. And sometimes, it could be that the leaders or the managers need to cascade that. But rather than push it down as a strong message, it also needs to come from within. And I that's why I think it's also the employees who play a huge role in wanting to get that sense of, yes, I want to learn, I want to develop. And let's face it, right? We've all left school, we've all left colleges. Nobody wants to go back and study, right? Everybody says that they do. There's so many people who buy books, but then they're reading the summary, right? Everybody wants it in, notes, short notes, right? Um, so I think the intention is right, but finding the time and motivation to act is the big challenge.
And Jared, you had shared a couple of the programs that you've introduced at your company as well, but what are the kind of barriers did you have to overcome to get some of those things, or what are some of the things you run into?
Definitely speaking the same language as the other panelists here. I think cost is obviously a big one all the time, and time those are our two biggest, I think. The way that we've counteracted the cost is we build a lot of our programming in-house, which reduces our dependence on external vendors. Partially that decision was made because we looked at the data that we had, and compared to what we were spending to bring in external folks, we weren't getting the ROI that we wanted. The feedback was not where we wanted it to be. And I'm not saying that vendors are not a good thing to pursue for every organization, but that was the case here. And so that forced us to build a lot of things internally. We're also a very busy agency environment. Things happen fast. Clients need things yesterday. And when you find yourself in an environment like that, it's hard to deliver a long training session. So to Deborah's point, we need to be building things that can be delivered in like an hour, and try and make that as impactful as possible. But then have the folks come back to that a number of times in order to action what they've learned. So one of the things that we've done, I'll just share an example from one of our DE&I training topics. We have a session on disrupting unconscious bias. And during that session, they're presented with a framework for how they can talk about unconscious bias on their teams and how they can interrupt unconscious bias when it happens in meetings, in client calls, wherever it might show up at work. We give them all of that, and then we issue them a challenge. Have this meeting on your team, come up with some strategies. And then about 3 months later, we hold a reflection, which is guided by members of our DE&I board. And during that session, they're meant to tell us, what went well about this work? What was hard about it? What did you actually learn? And what we found is that the engagement that we're getting from that reflection session has exceeded our wildest expectations. So really pleased with how that's been going. And that's just one of the ways that we try to operationalize, I suppose, the learning and make people actually do it.
I think there's an irony to the fact that a lot of times we don't run actual numbers on cost and on time, but we just anecdotally feel like it's expensive and who's got the time. But then one thing we absolutely know is that if we conduct a training of some sort and we don't translate into action the way you've described, Jared, it's not going to be effective. It's just not going to work because people will leave the workshop environment, this artificial learning environment, get completely absorbed with just the day-to-day work again, and then it's totally gone. So I think these are three really important levers that you're highlighting for us panelists when it comes to, let's think about the cost, let's think about access, time, format. There's a lot, that's going on here. But the other thing that's very clear for me is that we've heard a lot of different, what I would call stakeholders or role players. We talked about the executives a little bit, clearly the people on the call that are business owners or HR leaders. Then I've heard employees a little bit too. So it's really my question of, when it comes to responsibility, accountability, however you like to think about it, whose job is it to make sure that learning is happening? And Deborah, I'm going to ask you, like, when you hear something like that, like, who should I be looking at when I'm like, learning's not happening? Where do we start?
I really think it's everyone, Matt. It does tie in with ROI, period. Like, we have in the training programs that I facilitate, we measure a pre, a post. We see where is the learning, the concepts, the behaviors improved, where are they lacking. We also find that if we continue on the training, and Jared mentioned this, the small group coaching, to continue that behavior and reinforce it. But at the end of the day, it comes down to everyone. So I would say any individual contributors on this call, you've got to manage up. If you're not going to receive training and your job is going to be difficult and unfulfilling, at some point you're going to leave the company anyway. You've heard the saying, people leave people, they don't leave companies. And so you have to manage up. And I'm not saying that's easy by any means. I've had plenty of roles in my early career where I should have said, hey, you're asking me to do something, but you haven't provided any training on it. Managers, all the way up to executives, have a responsibility to make sure that folks know how to do their job. For the folks out there that use predictive index, you're taking the first step in understanding, is that person hardwired to do the work? But then you want to go the extra mile to say, now I owe it to them to provide the on-the-job training that they need, that 70% to fully understand the job. And just to stick up for my L&D folks out there, I feel like a lot of this ends up falling on you all. And at the end of the day, you too have to press back. You have to go to frontline managers. You have to go to leaders and say, where are we missing? What gaps do we have? And let us look for training that can fill those gaps. So at the end of the day, it's my belief that it does fall on everyone, Matt.
It's such a cop out too if an executive's turn to L&D and say, well, we're unhappy, we don't believe we have the leadership capacity, we don't think we've got the skills, we're not ready for the future. And you're like, okay, great, talk to us about your strategic plans. Well, we're not really specific about what we need. We just have this generalized sense. You're like, help me help you. Like, what's happening here? And give the attention and the budget. And how about if we throw a training, you actually show up so people know this stuff matters? Like, it's I'm hearing you say that everybody's responsible and participates. That also means we all have to support one another in this too. So I think we can lean on the executives a little bit and say, you got to do your part here.
Yeah, absolutely. And new people, I'll say those are the best folks to provide the feedback because they're fresh and new into the role. So absolutely make sure you touch base with them 30, 60, 90 days into the role, and you'll get a lot of good little vignettes of, hey, this is where we're missing some things and this is where we could do better.
It brings up one more point, which is simply that if we have this unfortunate attitude, an inappropriate attitude, the Gen Z, for example, unemployable. Well, how does Gen Z learn? Very self-service, very micro, very fast, comes into the organization, can't find any information about how stuff actually works around here. Well, like we have to meet in the middle here, right?
Yeah.
But I go ahead. I'm sorry. Okay,
I'm gonna say this. So I do agree it's everybody's responsibility, but if I have to look at the percentage of it, I think Eleanor does take a higher percentage of the accountability for this. I know it's hard to have some of these conversations with the management team, and because yes, yeah, exactly as you both were saying, do show up to the training, right? So I think having some of those crucial conversation becomes the unenviable part of this job. And I would say kind of from a broader responsibility, just taking that, I feel like you got a very good tagline there, I think, Matt. The entire conversation today is just going to go back to Gen Zs. Just having that headline come up. I think L&OD, I keep saying L&OD because L&OD is in my world, but L&D does play a huge role in generation of these taglines too, because I think the responsibility of even preventing such scenarios falls on L&D. I think we could be a lot more proactive in, and I think I liked a lot of what Jared, some of his examples in some of the trainings is how can we get proactive about even addressing some of these concerns could be kind of a broader responsibility and accountability debate. Yeah.
I want to shift gears for us a little bit and recognize the fact that there's this tried and true techniques when it comes to learning. For example, Deborah, you mentioned 70, 20, 10, these are models that have existed and served us well for a long time, but there's also new stuff. And Jared, I wonder if you might get us started in this portion of the conversation. When you think about things that are like never going to go out of style, things that are tried and true, like what's an example of something in the learning world that has that sort of staying power?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I am a big believer in mentorship. I talked about that program a little bit already. One of the things that I always like to bring in is things like case studies, hands-on discussions where people are helping to solve each other's problems. So we have one session here called Difficult Conversations, and The idea behind that session is that people actually bring a real life conversation that they need to have, whether it's with a direct report or a leader or a peer. And they workshop that conversation together. So they try to anticipate what might be the pushback, or what might be the other person's feelings behind that conversation. And what we found is the outcome from that session is that people go in with a bit of a game plan for the conversation that they need to have. So I think, we've talked about this a little bit already during this session, but anytime that there's a way for people to actually be solving a real problem that they have during training, that's going to make their buy-in for it considerably higher, and they're going to get a lot more out of the session. The other thing that I just wanted to quickly mention is credibility. So we've talked about leveraging the leaders and the executives in the organization. I think that one way to do that is to actually have those folks be the facilitators of your session, because that helps build the credibility that you want in your programs. So we've had definitely some success doing that. And I think in our environment, again, I mentioned it's very fast paced. People, they want like the quick, like, what is my reason for being here and what is my takeaway? And learning from another leader who's been where they are is one great way that you can do that.
What a great partnership between an educator, a learning, an instructional designer, a professional, along with an executive who says, I don't know how to do any of that stuff. You're like, you don't have to. You're the subject matter expert. I'll pull that out of you. I'll show you how. I'll set you up. But I can't have your credibility, and you don't know my instructional design capability. So it seems like a real partnership is possible, for those groups, which is nice. But Akshata, I want to turn to you next, because I want to talk about some of the glitzy stuff, some of the newer stuff, because I think that our audience is pretty innovative and they push as well. What are some of the things you think about? I hear all kinds of terms, micro learning. I used that term earlier, but it's hard to separate the hype from sort of the things that have actual potential. So when you think about some of the newer things that you're excited about, what would fall into that category?
Frankly, more AI is where we are focused on. We're doing a lot of work on actually building on our own internal chatbot and actually creating learning apps by embedding AI in it. We just also, because given that we are also servicing our clients, we also want to showcase that we have these capabilities internally as well. So, and you have to think about all these terms, right? They all are here for every year. This is the flavor of the year. AR, VR was so big, we could do nothing with it clearly, right? It was not everybody, I don't think anybody even needed it at that point.
Where are my goggles?
And then you also had gamification, which I still think is very relevant. And I was very proud of this whole project, and I go present it. And the leadership team has like, okay, this is great, but where's AI? Right? That's the only question that one of your earlier questions on ROI, how do I go convince leaders? They all want to hear only AI. They don't want to hear anything else. And so it's a very careful, thoughtful consideration for me to now think about how to set the team up for success is planning for everything with AI. And I'm pretty excited about this new chatbot. We actually had one tested out where we took the HR policies as one of our test projects, and we built a chatbot that could really provide an entire, just for the US policies on it. It worked out perfect. We used an intern for it, and now we're scaling it, and we're looking to build learning plans with it. So we're going to have people speak to the chatbot. We have a lot of different personalities, and that provides them an answer with what trainings and learning plans would be best suited for them.
It's a great example about how the outside world absolutely gets into the ears of the executives. We're just screaming at executives about what's your AI strategy? How are you going to make good on AI? It's changing the world. And then somebody in the back is going, soft skills, empathy. You can't compete. You rise above the noise, even though that's what employees are saying. We're suffering because we're not getting the people skills, but AI is just so loud right now too. So Deborah, I'll ask you the same question. When you think about some of these newer things, the glitzy, glamorous things, like what pops into mind for you?
Well, teaching in a business school, we're always trying to get creative. In addition, I have 3 Gen Zers at home, guys. So I fully understand and appreciate, creative measures, so to speak, to reach that group. But, people underestimate some of these games and what you can learn from them. Kahoot is great. Adults love Kahoot. I've never seen a group of executives get more excited and challenged about trying to beat each other in Kahoot and who ends up on the leaderboard at the end. Minecraft has been really educational in terms of improving problem-solving skills, research, math. Lego is doing some fascinating things. I have a son that's very much into Lego and is a master builder. And if you follow their creative path, they're doing a lot of things that encourage relaxation and mindfulness, which is wonderful for adults, especially those of us going 110 miles an hour. So at the end of the day, some things will come and go. Glitzy, your word. We have to, meet the learner where they are in their learning journey. And if Gen Zers learn a little different than millennials, that's okay. So let's just figure out how to reach them. And then the cool tools that are out there, like Akshata said, around AI, they're going to assist us in that process.
Yeah, I like that too. It's almost like having that customer mindset when the employee needs to learn. And if they're Gen Z, digital savvy, how do we get them that versus something that we might be more comfortable because this is the way I learned when I was 20 years ago, blah, 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 whatever it might be. But Jared, I want to also, we have got just a couple more minutes of our panel discussion here. And I want to come back to something you talked about a little bit earlier, which is around learning after the fact. So when you think about that reinforcement bit, so what are some of the other ways? Can we talk a little bit more about, from your perspective and your experience, how do we make sure that the learning sticks?
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that we piloted last year was a micro-learning strategy. So I'm sure that everybody on this call knows about micro-learning. It's not exactly a brand new thing, but we've used it sort of in two different ways for two different programs. So the two primary programs that I actually lead are our leadership development, and then we have an emerging leaders program that's specific for BIPOC talent. And in both of those programs, we've rolled out micro-learning in slightly different ways. In our leadership development program, we're doing kind of what you're talking about, Matt. We're reinforcing the learning. And what we've done is, in a spaced out timeline after they've engaged with the content, they get these notifications that are like, hey, there's a micro-learning for you now. And that will go back and re-highlight one of the things that they talked about in the training. The sort of the adult learning principle behind that is something called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, which again, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, but if you're not, the idea is that after a learning experience, one day later, you've forgotten a certain amount of it. A couple days later, you've forgotten even more. A week or two later, if you haven't applied it or been exposed to it again, you've basically almost forgotten the whole thing. Micro-learning is one of the things that you can do that's actually relatively low lift for an L&D team to help reinforce that learning and reduce that forgetting curve. In our Ascend program, which is our emerging leaders program for BIPOC talent, we've taken a slightly different approach. For that one, when we were first researching the program and deciding what topics we would cover, we ran a number of focus groups with the target audience and with the discipline leads that they are ultimately reporting into. And what we landed on was way too many topics that we could possibly cover in a short-term program. So we created some micro-learning content for that group that is meant to fill in the gaps from what they're learning in the live sessions. So the micro-learning content there, they get a new one every week, and it's tied to what they've been learning. It's related, but it's actually new content for them. With both of those, I've been very pleased with the results, and would certainly recommend exploring that.
Sounds like the first one was really keeping the learning topic and content alive, and the second one is the learning mode is still alive, even though it's new content, which is pretty cool. And I had forgotten about the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, which is a little bit ironic, even though it makes sense. But Deborah, I want to ask you the same question when it comes to reinforcement, because I think you have some techniques to share with us.
Yeah, I think two that have really worked for me are accountability partners, right? Because if you have to meet with your peer in 30 days to talk about progress that you've made from that training that you received. The pressure is sort of on, but with an accountability partner, those folks can also help you get some of those negative thoughts out of your head. For those of you that are not comfortable with difficult conversations or delegating, if you're able to bounce that off of somebody else, then that reinforces that learned behavior. Because remember, habit wins, guys. It's what we can actually get on a piece of paper, plan, follow up on. Jared, you mentioned I love the idea of you getting a notification on your phone and it says, hey, you've got to follow up with this, or you've got to do another exercise around that assignment. Same goes for having an accountability partner. The other piece, I would just say small group coaching is very effective as well. So if a group of 20 go through a cohort, to break them down into 3 or 5 folks, and you make sure that they meet on a regular basis, that also can have a good outcome when it comes to reinforcing behaviors.
I love it. I think it's making it stick is so important if we're going to see the effectiveness, whatever it is that we're learning. We've got to make sure it stays in there. And Akshata, I'm going to round out our panel with a question for you because it's tied to one of the Menti results, which is all about when we think about investments, right? How do we sort of evaluate? How do we prioritize those things? What advice would you have for our audience, our listeners here, when it comes to trying to help make sure executives are properly prioritizing and evaluating these learning investments?
Any program, it should answer one basic question. What business problems are we trying to solve?
Mm.
As long as, you have the right tangible answer to that wins half the battle. That gets you half your investment. Coming up with best programs, training programs, external research, you might put your heart and soul into finding every possible rationale to justify the right training program. But if it is not in support, or if you cannot articulate how it supports the business development and growth, you're at a dead end. So always answer that one question, and everything else will fall in place. And that also it demonstrates not to the business leaders, not just how serious you are and your research and your work, but it makes their job easy. It just makes them saying a yes a whole lot more faster.
I think that's so huge. And especially when we saw the popularity of something like leadership development, generalized leadership development, not interested. Leadership development that drives the business, very interested, right? That's how we have to approach it. But thanks so much, panel. We're going to get ready to shift gears to the next Q&A portion of the show, where we're going to answer some questions from the audience. So as you're going with us here today, audience, if you want to use the Q&A button in the Zoom toolbar there, we can go ahead and get your questions in. And there's also going to be a link in the chat to be able to let us know if you're interested in learning more about talent optimization, either because you're an organization that wants to use these types of solutions with your employees, or whether you're maybe already an existing client or a PI partner and you just want to learn a little bit more. Either way, you can put your appropriate answer there as well. And I'm going to go ahead and ask Rachel to resume some of our slide share. That would be awesome. And I wanted to point out that sometimes we have these conversations and you're like, okay, but I didn't get to talk about my specific situation, and we have an answer for you. So in 2 weeks, we're going to have a chance to continue the conversation with a mastermind session. This is an hour-long session of small group coaching, like Deborah was just talking about, where we get together and talk about having an invite to come and work with myself and some other like-minded folks to give one another coaching, guidance, suggestions, support, everything that you need. And if we go ahead and do one more click on the slide, this is just from last month's conversation. We had a chance to have this as well. Thank you for a great session. Really enjoyed it. Really loving the sessions. And yesterday was fantastic. So we'd like you to have a fantastic experience. So if you want to be considered for that session, just go ahead and use the Zoom poll response and we'll get you an invite. So we're ready for the audience Q&A part of the show. I'm going to go ahead and get us started with this question. This is going to be just for the general panel. How would you coach millennial leaders how to stop saying things such as, okay, boomer, to the older generations in the workforce, right? Doing this won't get boomers to embrace millennials. That is fair. Alternatively, we really need to stop slamming entire generations such as millennials and or Gen Z. What do you suggest as a way for leaders to get better at this? Who'd like to weigh in on that one first? Everybody's being polite. Go ahead, Akshata.
I'm just going to say, Well, if somebody's saying, okay, boomer, that's another problem altogether. I don't know if that's a training issue. It's certainly another issue.
Yeah.
We should have another chat about it. But I think I'm going to refer a little to what Jared said something earlier, but something that we've all learned over time. There needs to be a sense of curiosity and open-mindedness from two sides. It's a two-way street. It cannot be that, we all learn how to work with Gen Zs or Gen Zs learn how to work with the other generations. I think it comes from, right from orientation for Gen Zs, but also for people who are in the workforce already is a continued and it's not as simple as training. Maybe it's a micro learning, right, Jared? Is how do you constantly create that environment of curiosity and patience and eagerness to learn and appreciate differences. If it's another form, an extended form of DE&I, if you think about it.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. That's it's so true. And I feel like any of these differences that we highlight across the generations, and when we don't look for similarities and unity, it only exacerbates the problems that we have. The reality is that every new generation that enters the workforce is always looked at, differently, and it's just no different. And so when we start to look at the way to suggest for leaders to get better at it is to understand the type of diversity that we heard about earlier. The fact is that we need representative views. And a lot of times if we only, for example, allow executives to say, well, everything needs to look the way that I had it when I was coming up through the ranks, that's totally inappropriate for what we have now. But the same fundamental disrespect, we can't have coming up from the bottom either. There's ways of using language, for example, that's very like, we know our language, let's use that. That's actually, not inclusive when you do that. And but I think we can all agree that Gen Z doesn't like millennials much more than they don't like boomers. That's what the research suggests. This next one's for Jared. Jared, how are you measuring the ROI of learning development plans? So something you had shared must have sparked a thought for somebody about ROI specifically for some of the great training programs that you've been sharing with us today.
Yeah, definitely. So it's very program dependent. What I like to do is very similar to Akshada's point from earlier. You have to understand what the business goal is because any ROI is going to be measured against that goal. So say your business goal is to reduce your reduce your turnover by 10%. That would be a pretty high goal. As Deborah had mentioned earlier, turnover is a huge cost for organizations. So from there, you can kind of dig into, okay, like, well, what's our turnover report telling us? Why are people leaving? Is it a higher salary? Is it they weren't getting the kind of work that they thought they were going to be getting? And then I use the turnover because it's easy to put a number on it. You can look at your turnover numbers. You can look at those salaries. You can estimate how much it's costing you. If you reduce that by 5%, that's your ROI versus what you spent on the training. Some of the leadership development is harder to put an actual number on. So for those types of ROIs, usually it would be something from a survey, whether that's a company-wide engagement survey and measuring the scores year over year. We're lucky enough to be able to dig into those numbers pretty granularly and see, the folks who have participated in our leadership development, their teams are saying these kinds of things about them. Those are some of the ways anyways.
I'm hearing a lot of connection to things that are happening in the business, as well as real data backing that up, ways to get that ROI. I find that it's easy to ask for ROI. It's really hard to sort of pull the actual actionable data to put it together. But when you put together the case, the mechanics of it, it actually works out.
Yeah, and Matt, can I give a quick example? Previous life, I was in the power sports industry, and the way that you could directly correlate training and tie it with ROI was that all departments had to do their job. So sales, parts, service, F&I, clothing, they all had to do their job. And at the end of that sale, the customer received a JD Power survey. The dealership had to get all tens to get the certain maximum amount of points from the OEM of the product that they were selling. The OEM based the number of units that dealership received. they base that on the JD Power scores. So if you get, 50 less units because your scores, you're not hitting 10s in each of those categories, it was imperative that you go back and fix the problem. You do training in each of the departments that weren't receiving the 8, 9, or 10. So I would challenge everybody on the call to think of a way to quantify it. Much easier to get it past your CFO and your finance team if they can really see a dollar amount tied to that specific training.
Yeah, a lot of times the connections are there. We just don't necessarily make them. But once we
Yeah.
do, we're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Now I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
Let's do another one here, shift gears, which is how can AI training demonstrate that training is worth employees' time and attention? How does the learning continue on into the org? So we're trying to create this culture to kind of embrace AI. Sometimes I know AI can be a little bit frightening for some people because it might affect job change and even job loss. But ultimately, how do we make sure that it's worth the time and attention and we can overcome some of the hype? Any recommendations on how to get people warming up to AI training? Yeah, go ahead.
I can take that one.
Yeah, please.
We just launched an AI specific program at my company recently, where we've had over 1,500 people in a period of 1 month complete an AI certification, anywhere from 2 hours to 20 hours. So we had different levels of AI programs. We curated different learning programs and plans. And we called it the Learning Revolution. It was fun. It was exciting. We had a month-long competition between departments. It was a bit of a fest, right? So long story short, what we learned out of it is people do want to learn about AI, right? They do. And I think we are at a stage within companies where they have already understood that AI is here, right? And this more stronger message that we could cascade from leadership and and beyond is to let employees know that they play a huge role in understanding AI because it's in the early stages. Everybody needs to learn this together. And we actually even went beyond the usual engineering teams and IT teams. We actually took Gen AI to operations, to finance, to HR, everybody took AI, even recruiters, right? So everybody, we had a separate AI plan for everyone on how can you use AI for better prompts, how to write it for better effective writing, effective presentation. So we sourced AI courses just for this. And at the end of it, we gave them badges, digital badges that they could, certificates, of course, and badges that they could put on LinkedIn. And it was a matter of great pride for them that, I am AI, certified. So it's about, I think you need to kind of ease them into it by also rewarding them and recognizing them. But more importantly, telling them that this is where the future is, bringing them together to say that we're all in this together. We all need to understand this together in order to make any profound enhancements to our work through AI.
I love that a lot. Thank you. Thank you, panelists. I'm hearing a lot of this holistic approach, everything from competitiveness to the badges and the recognition to community and even trying to appeal to the cognitive notion that this is the future, I need to be ready. It's like every little element is going to affect different people differently. So we got to make sure we cover all our bases if we're really going to draw everybody as much as we can into the program. So that's how you make it really cultural. I like it a lot. So thanks so much. So Rachel, I'm going to ask you to pull up the takeaways as well. We're going to have some contact information in the chat and certainly in the follow-up materials. If you had some questions for our panelists that you just didn't get a chance to ask based on time, you can find that LinkedIn is the place to get in touch with most of us. And we've got websites there for you as well. And again, that'll be in the follow-up materials also. And we've also asked our guests to share some nice promotions with us, things that they're excited about. So for Deborah, for example, we've got Deborah's next leadership development program, C-Suite Insights, will be in Nashville. So great work for executive education. Love that. Thank you, Deborah. Jared is recommending that you check out his author profile on Chief Learning Officer, where he has contributed 2 recent articles. And so you can go ahead and find that link as well in the chat. I can see it right over there on my shoulder. And Akshata has a book, The Serial Influencer, to get 24 strategies with more than 100 tips, templates, tools, and questions to become a serial influencer. Influencer and influencing, hugely important. And for me, I've got a recommendation to check out tomorrow's episode of Lead the People, which is a podcast. I'm talking to Bonnie Dilber. She's a recruiting leader over at Zapier. So we talked all about how to land top talent. So that would be great. And that will be on your podcast feed tomorrow. So next we have your tip sheet. So put together 10 different learning pathways for you. So you'll have that tip sheet. You can forward that to other people inside your organization, executives, leaders, just different array. Depending on your situation as a company, you might find some of these are quick and easy and cheap. Some are a little bit more involved, but just wanted to give you a nice smorgasbord of different options that you might consider to get the learning flowing in your organization. Next up, we have the, what is it? Oh yeah, the book giveaway. So Shira Matisak, I'm definitely not saying that right. Shira, congratulations on winning the book giveaway. I'll be following up with you to get that to you just as soon as possible. And for next month, we have Perspectives is going to be called Stick Together, Maintaining Employee Relations in an Age of Disconnect. So that'll be on Wednesday, October 9th, same time, 2 p.m. Eastern time. So employee relations, hugely important. If we're going to avoid that turnover, the types of things we were talking about on this call today, we'll have a panel to be able to discuss that with us. So that's it for today. I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Predictive Index, to all of our global consultants around the world, helping clients of all shapes and sizes bring their talent optimization dreams to life. And certainly biggest thanks of all to our panelists, Deborah, Jared, Akshata. Thank you so much for sharing your information and your guidance about learning. I love one of my biggest takeaways, the fact that learning is the critical skill. So much to learn, unlearn, relearn, hugely important. You've given us great ways to do that. So thank you very much for your time today and sharing your insights. Audience, I hope you really enjoyed the show, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.